Hi, and thanks for joining us in the Web SuperPowers series. In each episode, we introduce to you a new technology that you can use to supercharge your development. In today's episode, I'll be introducing you to Web API. In today's agenda, I'll introduce you to what Web API is. After we've talked about what it is and why we would want to use it, I'll then show you how to add Web API to an existing project. After we've added Web API, then we're going to consume it, and I will show you two different ways that we can consume it. One, using .NET and C# to consume, and then how to do it in jQuery if you wanted to extend your websites. So let's get started. Now, Web API is used whenever you want to expose data that's in your application out to other applications. In most applications, you have a database that's underneath your website, which is containing all of your great business entities. So you've got your customers, you have your orders, you have shipping information, and a great way to expand your website is to get other applications to hook into it. Now, these could be your own mobile applications, or it could be for third parties who want to integrate with your website or create little dashboard widgets. And Web API is a great way to expose this data out to those other applications. Web API is extremely simple to implement and consume. Very, very simple. You see, with just a few clicks, we can add it to our project, and with only a few lines of code, we can consume it from a client application. And everything that happens with Web API is using the HTTP infrastructure, but we'll talk a bit more about that later on. Now, we can't talk about Web API without talking about what came before it. Now, a lot of you may have used WCF before, Windows Communication Foundation. Now, WCF was a great idea, which was great in theory, but the implementation of it was a little cumbersome. The theory behind Web API was you'd be able to take any service and write it once and not worry about how you're going to expose it out to the world. So the idea was you could write it and then at any time change the configuration to expose it to send information across an in-memory pipe or HTTP or TCP/IP, and then change how the data is serialized and deserialized, either XML or binary data, etc. Now, the problem with this is that it was just overly complex to try and configure this. You would see giant XML configuration documents that big, and it would only take a single character to just mess everything up. And you had to do this configuration on both the server side and the client side. And I've been into lots of customer sites where they brought us in just to try and debug why the WCF implementation wasn't working, and it always came down to just that configuration file was wrong and incorrect. And so WCF tripped over itself because of this complex configuration, and if they had just had some nice defaults and some nice conventions, it would have been used a lot more. But the overly complex configuration was one of those main blocking points. The other reason why WCF has been seeing a slight decrease in current years is the clients that want to consume this information. WCF is very heavyweight. You need to have SOAP deserializers and things like this. Now, that's fine for an enterprise desktop application or for big enterprise systems to communicate with each other. But if you're trying to create a little phone application or a little website to try and consume a WCF service, there aren't as many ways to consume it. An iPhone, for example, isn't going to have a full WCF client implemented on it. And so for this reason, people have been looking for a more lightweight way to expose and consume data, and Web API is that answer. So Web API is based on the REST principles, and it will create a RESTful service for you. Now, the reason why Web API is much easier to use than WCF is it does create, it has a base set of conventions which helps simplify everything. Now, instead of having the WCF configuration where you were trying to define if it's over TCP or HTTP, etc., Web API just takes the assumption that you are going to be doing it over HTTP. That's it. So your transport layer is taken care of HTTP. And then each of the endpoints, rather than with WCF, you have to have the WSDL file defining where the create method is, the update method is, the delete method. Instead, we just go and embrace the HTTP stack and we use the HTTP verbs. Now, most people know about the get and post HTTP verbs, but there are actually 4 of them: get, put, post, and delete. And we can tie each one of those to the commands create, update, delete, and get. Now with those 4, we can use those to have a single endpoint now, so a single entity like your customer object, and that single endpoint you can just change which verb you're interacting with it with to create these or delete these. And this makes everything a lot simpler, as we'll see. And that's all the slides and talking I'm going to do. For the rest of the session, we're now just going to be looking at code and Visual Studio. So let's minimize this. Now, as I said, the first thing we're going to do is create our web API. And after we have created our web API, we'll then go and consume it in 2 different applications. So in order to to add web API to our project, we need a project to add it to. Now what I'm going to do is repeat what I did in the last webinar session, which was on MVC5. I'm going to very quickly in 5 minutes get to that exact same point, so we have a website with a database and entity framework there ready for us. Now I'm going to go File, New Project. I'm going to put this in C/source/demos, and we're going to call this the Webinar Web API Demo. Now we don't want a WPF application, that would be silly. We want a website, ASP.NET Web Application. Double click that. Now, last episode I did go through each of these different options here. So what happens if I select MVC versus Web API, or if I click Change Authentication, etc, etc. So if you would like more information on that, please watch the previous episode. For this I'm going to very quickly just run through this. Now I could just go and create a brand new Web API template, but the point of this is to try and show how to add it to an existing website. So I will go and create another MVC application. I'll pre-tick the Web API on it. Actually, no, I won't, because I'll show you if you're adding this to an existing project. And I don't want to host this on the cloud for this demonstration. Now, if I hit OK, it'll go off, create it. We can see down the bottom corner, it's going to go through and add each of our NuGet packages one at a time. But very quickly. So now that we have our new MVC project created, we'll go through and add in some models for the data that we want to expose out to the world. Now I'll continue what I did with the last webinar episode and do it on coffee. We had coffee and the company that sells the coffee, such as Starbucks or Donut King. So I'm going to right-click Models, add a new class. Going to add a new class called Coffee. Now coffee has a few things, so we'll type them in one at a time. Prop, int ID, prop, string, the name of the coffee, prop, int, the volume of the coffee. So we could have a 600 ml cappuccino. Prop, company, the company that sells this, such as Starbucks. I'll create the company class, int ID, string for the company name, and we'll just go and add on some attributes for this. So for Entity Framework, I'm just going to specify that this is the key. It isn't required because via convention it'll look for a property called ID, but I just like being explicit with this. Now that's enough, but and under the covers it'll go and create 2 tables, a coffee table and a company table. It'll create the primary key, foreign key constraints on it, and there will be a foreign key called company ID in this coffee class. And it's there and it's just hidden behind the scenes, but for this I'd just like to expose it, company ID. And to indicate that we know what we're doing and we know that this is a foreign key, we're just going to flag that this is a foreign, if I can spell, foreign key. for company. Okay, so that's enough for Entity Framework to take this, create our tables for us, and we can get the MVC scaffolding now to create the screens to do the create, reads, updates, and deletes. So again, let's just get to where we were last time, and under controllers, we'll add 2 controllers, add a new scaffolded item, MVC5, model class is coffee. Data context, we're going to create a brand new Entity Framework code first context. There you go, coffee is controller. That'll go through and add the coffee controller. And then I'll go and create a second one for company. And again, I'm just quickly doing this so we can get to the same point that we were at the end of the last webinar series and to just refresh your memory for what we did last time. But again, it only takes about 5 minutes to redo everything we did in the last session. So add in a second scaffolded item, add in company, hit add. And once that one's done, we hit run and we just go and quickly populate our database with a few companies and coffees. Now our website's just spinning up. IIS Express is doing its thing, and in just a few seconds, here we go. Here's our front page. So if we go /companies, we should load up our MVC5 controller. Our page will load up. It's taking a few seconds now because this is the first time that we've tried to access our database. Entity Framework code first is now running off, creating the database, creating the tables, creating the primary key, foreign key constraints. It's doing all of that for us behind the scenes. And again, if you aren't too sure what I'm doing and you'd like more information, please watch the previous episode and I'll take you right through to how to create those databases and get it deployed up into Windows Azure websites for free. Now, we've got these companies here, so I'll create 2 of them. I'll create Starbucks, and I'll create a second one for Donut King. There we go. And we'll go and we'll add in a few coffees by hitting the coffees controller. Create new, and I'll add in a hot chocolate. Hot chocolate is not a coffee. What am I doing? A cappuccino. I can't spell cappuccino. It's a big 600ml cappuccino from Starbucks. We can have a flat white, 300ml from Donut King. And we'll have a long black, we'll make that a giant 800ml from Starbucks. So there we go. We've got our coffees, we have our companies, we have our database. We've got all of that ready for us to take and continue and add more to it. We'll close this and go back to our website and we'll stop that all. Now, as I said, the whole point of Web API is we now have this website, we have this important data that we'd like to share. We want people to take our coffee information and create their own mobile phone applications out of it. And the way we're going to do that is by adding Web API to this. Now, to add Web API is extremely simple. It's basically the same steps that I just did then to add in those MVC controllers, but I'll add in a Web API controller instead. So if I right-click, I'm going to add a new folder to put the API into here. Then I'm going to right-click and add it in. Now, at the beginning, when I did go File New Project, I pointed out the fact that I did not click the checkbox that said Add Web API to this project, and I want to show you why I did that. Now, if we right-click References, go to Manage NuGet Packages, check out the installed packages. If I search for Web API, we can see that there aren't any NuGet packages on there. And that's going to be the state that your existing website is going to be at. It's going to look just like this. You're going to have some data, but you won't have Web API in your project. Now, the Visual Studio tooling is smart enough to add in all of the references that you need for Web API. If we right-click and go New Scaffolded Item, we tell it to add a new Web API 2 controller with all of the actions, it'll go and add in all of those NuGet packages for us. If we hit Add, Model class, exactly the same, but I'm just doing it in a subfolder called API. We're going to tell it to use the exact same entity framework code first context. And I'm going to tell it to use async methods because it makes the code look cleaner. Now, if we look down the bottom left, we'll see it very, very quickly going through and adding in the NuGet packages one at a time. It may just flash up for a moment. It didn't flash up for a moment. Maybe it was just too quick. I'll do a quick build. Yep. Now, if I go back and check out those NuGet packages, we search for Web API. Now you can see we have the core libraries, the web host to host our Web API, etc. And the Visual Studio tooling added all of that in for us. Visual Studio did add in those references, but it has also brought up a README file telling us that it could do as much as it could, but it needs us to do one step. Now, before I do that one step, I'm going to create the second controller. Right-click, new scaffolded item, and we're going to add in one for company, using the same entity framework code first data context. And there we go. So we have two of them now. Now this is a very good point to point out the difference between the MVC controllers and the Web API controllers. Now the MVC controllers are there for people, for humans to consume it. The point of an MVC controller is to just output HTML. It may do a lot of fancy things under the covers. It's going and hitting databases and formatting CSHTML files, but at the end of the day, it's doing all of that just to go and output some HTML so that we can render it in a browser. Now MVC is doing that, but it's not very good for robots and for mobile phone applications. And that's what Web API is for. Web API, the whole point at the end of the day is to just send pure data. MVC is sending HTML. Web API is going to send JSON files. So very nice, small, compact, send just the raw data so our other applications can take that and do what they want with their own user interface. Now, we do have the MVC controllers and the Web API controllers, but again, Visual Studio pointed out to us that it needs us to do one thing. It needs us to go and register the Web API routes into our application. And it tells us exactly what to do, but the very important bit is this bit. Add the following lines to the beginning of the application start method. Now, one time I read this and I didn't read that bit, and I spent a good 2 hours trying to debug why it wasn't why it was not working. Now I'm going to copy this and go to do what it does, and I'll explain where I did trip over myself. So we're going to go into the global ASAX file, look for the app start method, and add this line to it. So if we scroll right down, global ASAX, application start method. Now, when I did this, I just add it to this method, and I pasted it in there. I brought in the using statements, hit run, but it was not working. And I couldn't figure out why. Now, what it's doing when we add in this one line is it's setting up the routes for how it takes the URL that the user has typed in the browser or our mobile phone application has sent to us. It's going to take that URL request and then route it to whichever controller that it wants. And so we now have two routes here, one for how to route it to MVC controllers, another one on how to route it to Web API controllers. And that's what this line and this line are doing. And where it actually does it is in this app start folder. When we added the Web API controller and the Visual Studio scaffolding added in those NuGet packages, it also added in this Web API config.cs file at the same time. And we can see here it's setting up a new route for us. So whenever our URL looks like this, our website.com/API/ the name of the controller that we want to handle this request, and then an ID to work on. So this could be API coffees, the coffee with ID of 2. And this will work like this. But remember, under route config, we also have how to go and route requests that come in for our MVC controllers. So that's going to be controller action ID. And this is why it's important, the order that we go and put in these routes registrations. So what I've done, if we go back to global ASAX, it's going to go and do it for the MVC routes first, and then the Web API routes. And this is wrong. This is where I did the mistake. So if I try to type in my website.com/API/coffees to hit my Web API one, if I've got them around the wrong way, it'll try to do the MVC one. So it'll try to parse this as /API. So try to find a controller called API controller / whatever. And this is wrong. It would fail. What we have to do, go and move this Web API configuration line above the MVC routes like this, and now everything will work correctly. Long story short, register it before the MVC routes. So now if I type in /API/coffees, it'll try to hit the Web API one. It'll go and hit /API, yep, /coffee, cool, and then it would work. If we try and hit our MVC controller and we just typed in /coffee/index, it'll try to hit this. That won't match, so then it'll fall through and hit the next route configuration, and it'll go /coffee/index, and everything's going to work correctly. Now that's the only tricky thing about the whole Web API thing, just making sure that you have the Web API registration, Web API configuration before the MVC configuration. That's the only tricky thing. So now that we've done that, let's run our website again. Spinning up. Now let's just verify that everything's working correctly. We're going to go and hit our MVC controller first to make sure our data's still there. And then we're going to go and hit our Web API controllers after. So let's check out what it looks like for human consumption. So you go /coffees, we're hitting our MVC controller, and there we go. Starbucks, Donut King, Cappuccino, Flat White, etc. That's all good. So if we want to hit our Web API controller, we're now going to type API/coffees, hit enter. There we go. It's going and spitting it all out in XML for us. The reason it's spitting it out as XML is because Google Chrome, in the HTTP header that it sends the, in order, the way that it prefers to receive data. So it prefers to receive data in XML format, and then JSON format, and then text. And so Web API can serialize this information in both XML and JSON format. If we wanted to see it in JSON format, if we load up Internet Explorer and try to hit our Web API, here we go, it's trying to download coffees.json. If I open it up and I drop down my font size to 18, there we go. Now I'll just quickly format this. Put this down here, put this one down here. Now, for those of you who may not have seen JSON before, it's very similar to XML, but instead of having XML elements, here with JSON we have key value pairs. So we can see we've got, in between these curly braces here, we've got a key value pair. So the ID property has a value of 1. The name property has a value of cappuccino. Volume has 600, etc., etc., etc. Now here, it's trying to output the child object, but it's null. The reason why it's null is because Entity Framework didn't go and preemptively fetch that data. Now we can easily change that by hitting stop, going and having a look at our Coffees controller. Now, and if we have a look at our Coffees controller, it looks very, very similar to our MVC controller. We've got something which is called something controller, Coffees controller, and then inside it we have a bunch of action methods. Now we've got get coffees, so we've got get coffees, which go and retrieve all coffees, which is what we're seeing here in our JSON file of results. Then we can go and get an individual coffee. So So we can go and just get one with the ID of 5. We can go and create coffees. I know that's update coffees. We can create coffees. We can delete coffees. So we have those 4 methods there. Get all, get one, create, update, and delete. We've got 5 different methods there. Now, here is where we're going our entity framework database context. We're going database.the coffees table, and it's just going and returning the entire coffees table. Now, because we know we do want those child objects to be there, we could go, oh, here we go. We go db dot. We can see we've got the companies table, and we have the coffees table. Coffees dot include, and we can just put in a lambda expression and say, include the company child object. Entity framework will now go and automatically pull out that with a join statement. If we go back to Internet Explorer, paste. Oh, helps if I run our website first. We should get our data back again once it's finished spinning up. And in just a few quick moments, there we go. We have the data coming down again. And again, if I bring down the font size to 18, and put that and that on a new line. So again, we've got our array of objects. And then over here we have now to the company object, the company property being null. You see the company object is another object because it's between curly braces again. And our company object has some properties. It's got an ID and an ID property of 1 and a company name property of Starbucks. So that's how we can put child objects within one object. Okay, so that works well, and we've got our data coming back from Web API. So you saw that was as simple as doing a right-click, add new scaffolded item, and adding in a new Web API controller. Very, very, very simple. And straight away, we're getting all of that data coming through. And this will work as long as you have an entity framework context there for it to work with. You can do that as an EDMX file with database first, or you can do it with code first like this. Either way will work. I just like using the code first way because it's very nice and clean and simple. Close that, close that. Okay, now this works well for just hitting it with a web browser, but I'd like to take a few minutes to just spend some time exploring how we can interact with this web API. How we're going to do this is with a free tool from Telerik called Fiddler. Now, if you just go and search for Fiddler on Google, it comes up as the first result. So telerik.com/Fiddler. It's a free download. You just simply download it. And what Fiddler is, it's a HTTP sniffer. And you can go and see the raw HTTP packets that are being sent between the client and the server and inspect and see what is happening. So if I bring up Fiddler, so for example, I could go to http://ssw.com.au/ssw, hit go. I got a 404 because I typed it wrong, /SSW. So we can see what's coming back. We're getting a 200 response. And if we go and click raw, we can go and see, there you go. There's all the HTML of our SSW front page. You can see all the bulleted points for lists and things like that. Now, we can use Fiddler for this to just do raw HTTP requests. So we're going to go and hit our web API and inspect how that works. So we're going to paste it in. Let's clear all of this. Localhost/API/coffees. If I hit that again, hit enter, we're doing a GET request got 200 response this time, which is good. And if you have a close look, you can see it says JSON there, because it knows that JSON data is coming back. Here we go. If we click on raw, we can see the raw data. So there's the raw JSON coming back, which is exactly the same as what we saw in our JSON text file here. Now, the good thing about Fiddler is we can also visualize this. If we click on JSON, we can go and visually see what our JSON objects look like. So we've got our cappuccino here with its child object. We have company here, a flat white, and we have a long black. Very simple. Now, we can go coffees/2 to get an individual coffee. Hit execute, 200 status response again, double click it, there we go, we've got that individual flat white. Go to /3, there we go, we have that long black this time. And we can interact with that, but as I mentioned, we can also do post, put and delete to create, update and delete these objects. If I go post, go to coffees. So first thing we need to do is go content type is applications/JSON. So we need to tell the web server that we are sending it some information, and server needs to know if it's in JSON format or XML format. It doesn't know how to deserialize it. It doesn't know if we're just sending it really badly formatted XML or if we've just sent it something incorrectly. So this is why we're telling it straight away to look at it as application/JSON. So now we could send it a new object. So we want to create a new coffee. So name is, what's another one? Flat white, chai latte, name of a coffee. I don't drink coffee. Frappuccino. I don't know how to spell frappuccino. Frappuccino. Volume of 333, just so we can see that looks different. Name, volume, company ID. We'll set that as 2. So 2 was Donut King. If we hit execute, 201. So 201 status means an object was created for us. If we click on here, click on raw again, so it's returned us back the object that it just created. Now I didn't pass in an ID, but it automatically added in the ID for us because that was the auto-generated primary key. Something else that's cool though is right up here under location, it's actually given us the new URL to access this object directly. Now this is very useful if you are creating a phone application, for example. A user could go and type in their information and create a new entity. So they hit create, it'll send that post request to the server. The server will create it, but then the server returns back the URL in order to access this. So from that point on, your mobile phone application can just go and hit that new URL to pull back that individual entity whenever it would like to. So if we select this, go copy, go back to Composer, go coffee/4, change it back to a get, hit execute. There we go. There's our Frappuccino. If we go back to Composer, go /coffees, that'll go pull them all back, and we should see 4 of them there now. But we can go in and delete an individual one. So let's now go and delete ID2. So again, it's just a different HTTP verb. Change this to a delete, hit execute. We got a 200, which means successful. So if we go back and we do yet another request, that's not what I wanted, do a get of all coffees and have one last look, we should see we've got 1, 2, 3 coffees now, ID 1, 3, and 4. So we did go and successfully delete that coffee of ID of 2. Now this is pretty cool. If you think about it, now all we're doing is this whole system is simple enough that we can just send raw HTTP packets to our server in order to manipulate our database. We can do requests for getting data, for creating these objects, and for deleting them. We can do all of this. Now, obviously, you may want to lock down the delete command if you've got this exposed out publicly. Now, we've seen how we can easily do this with raw HTTP commands using Fiddler. So now I'm going to move on to the final part of my presentation where I describe how we can go and interact with Web API through our own clients. Now, I'm going to go and do this with a .NET application first, and then I'll move on to how to do it with jQuery in a web page. With .NET, I'm going to create a new Visual Studio project. Now, I'm going to show you how you can do this in .NET, and you can consume Web API on any .NET platform, so Windows Forms, WPF, Silverlight, Windows Phone 7, Windows Phone 8, and Windows 8 applications, MVC5 in the controllers, anything that can run C# and is on .NET 4.5 or one of the portable class library platforms, any of those can consume a Web API exactly how I'm about to show it. So I only need to show you this a single time, and you can run it on desktop applications and Windows Phone applications and server-side websites. So let's go File, New Project. And I'm going to create a new WPF application. We're going to call this the Webinar Web API WPF application. We hit OK. Now, in order to consume this, we need to do raw HTTP commands. There are a few different ways to do it, but Microsoft have released a new NuGet package which we can use to send these raw HTTP commands. And this new HTTP client that Microsoft has released has been released as a portable class library, meaning we can run this NuGet package on any of those platforms that I mentioned before. Now, a WPF application has been created, so I'm going to right-click, go Manage NuGet Packages, click Online, and I'm going to search for HTTP client. We'll let it hit the internet, and here we go. It's its first result, the Microsoft HTTP clients. And if we scroll down and look at the bottom, we can see under supported platforms, it runs on everything pretty much. .NET 4, 4.5, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, Windows 7, Silverlight if you're still working on those, and anywhere that a portable class library runs. So this is going to run on web forms and ASP.NET MVC applications. So if we click Install, NuGet's going to go download this package. We accept it blindly without reading the EULA, and it will go and add it into our project for us. Now, that's the first part of this puzzle. In order to go and do those HTTP commands and get that packet of JSON back to us. We are then going to need to add a second library, so we can take that raw JSON text file and convert it back into .NET objects for us. And the way to do this is with the Web API. We scroll down, it's called the Web API Client Libraries. Now, all this does is how to de-encode data that's in JSON and XML format. If we hit Install, now all this does is add on a few extension methods to the HTTP library that I installed on just a second ago. So we have those two parts, HTTP client to go and do those HTTP commands to get the raw JSON data, and then the client libraries, which are extension methods, to add onto it to take the raw JSON data and convert it into .NET objects. But again, I'll call out each one of those as I use it. I'm going to go to my toolbox, Common, and let's add on a button. And I'm going to add on a text block. I'll make this nice and big. So what I plan on doing is click on this button. It's going to go hit our Web API, pull back the data, and then we're going to go and display each of these coffees right here. Let's give this text box a name. We'll call it our coffee text block. There we go. Click on button. And let's give it a new click event. Click equals create a brand new method. Okay, so we've clicked our button. We need to do a few simple things. So if we go var client equals a new HTTP client, if I spell it with the correct, there we go. So now we've got a new instance of HTTP client ready to interact with a web API. So we can go var response equals our client dot get asynchronously and paste in the URL for our coffees. Now, if we have a quick look, we have got get, we've also got post, we have put, we have delete. So we do have each of these methods there ready for us to go and send it. Now, because this is got the keyword async, that's a little flag for us to let us know that this method runs asynchronously, and we need to use the await async keywords. So if we currently look at this, it says that get async is returning a task. But we don't want a task, we want to go and execute the task in order to go and get our JSON data. We type in await. Now this is complaining because it says no, we can only do that in methods that we have flagged that there may be asynchronous code in here. So we type the async keyword there, and that's all going to work correctly now. We hover over var, it's now changed from being a task to a HTTP response message, which is great. So if we have a look inside of this response object, we'd see the same thing that we saw in Fiddler when we clicked on one and we went on raw. We had the headers, we had the body, and this is the same thing. This is going to have the status code and all of that. So if we go response dot, we can see we have the headers in there, we have the status code, and we have the content. And that content is going to be that raw JSON data. So, but what we would really like to do is take that content, and now this is that extension method that we added on with the Web API client libraries. If I go to read as, so you can see that they've got a different icon on there. The ones with these purple square boxes, these are all methods which exist on that object. But down here, we have read as async, and these are those extension methods because I've got these little down arrow things. So we want to take this raw JSON text and read it as a type of object. So we want to read this as coffees, but actually we know that if we're getting it from /coffees, that's going to be giving us a list of coffees. So we actually want this to read it as an IEnumerable of coffees, and that should return it to us as an array. So let's have var results equals, we see the async keyword again, so we need to type in await. Put it in a semicolon, and we're almost ready to go. One problem that we've got here though is our WPF application is just a client consuming our web API, and it doesn't know what a coffee is because we haven't defined that class anywhere. Now, because we are writing both the server side and the client side, we could cheat. We could go back to our webinar application, look in the models folder. We could double click on coffees, we could select this, copy this, and paste it into our other project. And we could do that because we control both the front end and the back end. But if we are just creating our application and we want to consume someone else's RESTful or Web API service, we don't have that code. So I'll show you a technique that you can use to go and generate the C# code for yourself. Now let's go back to Fiddler. Actually, no, we don't. What we need is some raw JSON data, and we still have it here in my notepad from before. If we go back, we search for JSON to C#. There's actually a website called json2csharp.com. If we click on that, we can paste in our sample data. Oh, that's our old sample data. We need our new sample data. So let's go and do a new get command. Yep, much better. Let's go raw copy this, paste it in. There we go. We have our array of them. Wherever it is split up. Anyway, let's just hit generate. There we go. It was smart enough to be able to take that JSON data and reverse engineer it and create our C# object for us. And it did a fairly good job. We've got our company class with an ID and company name, which is correct. It's got our second object with an ID, name, volume with ints and strings, and it can see the child object of company. It did all of that for us. The only thing it couldn't get is the name of this object, which was the coffee. But we can do that one little bit. So that's a good little technique if you want to consume anyone else's web API. We go back to a WPF application. We're going to go and add this in now. Right click, add new folder. Models, not Moodles, models. We're going to add in a new class, call it coffee. Paste, public class company, public class coffee. If we go back to here, we can now bring in our using statement and everything's working well. So let's go put in a breakpoint in here, hit F5. A WPF application is going to build. We're going to click this button. Okay, so we went and did a get command on our /coffees. We hover over response. We can see that we've got a HTTP 200 status, which means that everything is good. We can go back into that. Oh, right click, quick watch, maybe easier. There we go. So we have our headers. Our headers are going to give us information that came back from the server. We've got the status code, which is OK, which is a 200 status code, etc. So that's all good. But inside of it is content, which is what we want, which is that raw JSON data. So then we can go response.content. Cool. We can tell that's just raw UTF encoded JSON. And then we go and read it as an array of coffees. If we hover over here, we can see results has 3 objects in this now. We go and inspect this in. There we go. We've got a cappuccino with 600 mils, and we even have the company name there as well. That's pretty cool. There you go, long black from Starbucks, and we have a frappuccino from Donut King. So that was extremely simple. If we have a look, it's only 3 lines of code to go and consume that web API. And as I said, we could now change this from a get async to a delete async and give it a URL /2 to delete number 2 again. Or we could go post and take in some information from the user from a number of text boxes and go and run post async and send in the data. So let's put this back to get. Now let's take this data and just output it to the screen. So I'm just going to do that by using a string builder. Var sb equals new string builder. Then we're going to do a for each, and for each coffee in results, and we're going to go string builder dot append line and add in, let's see, name is coffee name, volume, and put in the volume, and let's put in the company that it's from. Let's do this as 2 things. Var text equals string.format. If you haven't seen this before, you can go and just in a string put inside of curly braces variables that should be inserted at this point to make it nice and clean and readable. And then after the fact, we can go and put these in one at a time. So we want to put in coffee.name, coffee.volume, And for the last one, we want, oh, I've got to put a space here. We want our coffee object dot company to go and access our company object, and then we want the company name to be outputted here. So we want to go and append this text to it and continue from there. Once we have each of those, we just want to output it to our screen, which was the coffee text block. Coffee text block dot text equals string builder dot to string. There we go. If we hit this, it should go through, hit our breakpoint that we don't want. We'll hit continue, and there we go. Cappuccino 600 mils from Starbucks, long black 800 from Starbucks, Frappuccino 333 from Donut King. Very, very, very simple to consume this. Now we could take this code and it would, not this bottom code, but we could take these 3 lines and again run it on any .NET platform. Now, I've shown you how to consume this on a .NET platform, but let's go and show you how we could do it on a website using jQuery. So let's close this down, we don't need this anymore. Let's go back to our Web API project. Is this still running? No. Let's restart it. Now what we may do is go and list out the coffees on a page. So we could do it, let's go and add it to the, whoops, not. Same/about. Sure, let's add it here. I'm just trying to find a page where we could add it anywhere. So on this about page, we're going to go and just get, once this page has loaded, here on the client side, we're going to use jQuery to do an AJAX request to go and hit our Web API method to pull back all of our coffees as JSON, and then go and update our screen to just list out those coffees one at a time, and do this all client side to show you how we can do it in either way. Let's close this, go back, hit stop. Okay, let's scroll down, we'll go to home, go to our about page. Now on our about page, we need somewhere to output all this data. So let's just add in a new div tag, ID equals, let's call it our coffee data div. So it's now an empty div that we're going to insert that data into. So let's go and add in some JavaScript to this. Now because this is a CSHTML file and we're using the base templates, the way you want to add in any arbitrary JavaScript, which is going to be the same for all of your MVC pages, is by putting it in a section dedicated to that. So if I type in section, our autocomplete comes up with scripts. So this is where we can define our scripts. So in here, we're going to go and do 2 things. The first thing is to go and get that data. Once we've got that data, we need to go and insert it into that coffee data div. So there's 2 motions, get and then update the screen. So what I'm going to do is I have the snippet here. I'm going to paste it in there rather than me trying to type it out, but I will talk through what it's doing. So we've got $, which is our alias for jQuery. So we're going to go $.ajax to indicate we're doing an AJAX request. We specify that it's a get command. So again, exactly like we did in C#, we could change it from get to post or delete. Leave that as get. We need to put in the correct URL for this, which we go back to Fiddler. We can just copy that again, paste. Now, once we've gone and requested the data, if the data comes back correctly, we're going to do whatever is here inside of this success method. If we had any issues, we're just going to throw up an error message. But if it did happen, then we're going to go through and do exactly what we did in the C# code. We're going to loop through those results and spit them out to the screen. The first thing we'll do is do an AJAX selector. So dollar bracket hash means find an element in our page which has an ID of this. And because I've got ReSharper and Web Essentials installed, if I put in the hash, it's smart enough to go through and do IntelliSense and look at everything up here. So you can see the coffee data element that we have, so that's good. We want to go and select that coffee data div element, then we want to append to the end of it. We're going to do exactly the same thing. Coffee, the name is data dot name, and we can spit out the volume. If we hit run, what we should see happen is our page is going to load, and then a fraction of a second later, our data is going to go and load up after the fact. Because our page is loaded, and our JavaScript is going, here we go, the page is loaded, and there we go. A few seconds later, our jQuery has had a chance to get the data, go and insert it back here. Hit refresh, there you go, very, very quick. And now you could take this and you could add this into your own pages anywhere. So rather than doing a full post back each time you want to retrieve some new data, you could just go and do the AJAX query to just pull out the one object that you want, pull back just that tiny little bit of JSON, and once we have that JSON, go and just do a few lines of jQuery. We saw here it's 1, 2, 3, maybe about 4 lines of jQuery code to go and update elements on your screen. Extremely simple, and it means the user is going to have a much quicker response because we're not sending giant HTML files down anymore, just tiny little JSON fragments, and we just update the screen as it is. And that's all I want to show you today. So what we've taken you through today is having a look at what Web API is and how it's extremely simple to implement and use. Much simpler than it was with WCF. And now with Web API, we can implement it once and then very simply consume it on mobile phone applications, websites, server backends, etc. And then we had a look at how we can do this, how we can add it to an existing project by just simply doing a right-click, add new scaffolded item. And then we saw how we can just interact with the Web API in a raw fashion using just raw HTTP packets with Telerik Fiddler. And then after that, we saw how to implement it with CSharp with a portable HTTP client and extension methods. And then right at the end, how to do it in on the client side in the browser with jQuery. So thanks again for joining us. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you'd like to keep up to date with the future Dev Superpower videos, episodes that are coming out, please go to www.devsuperpowers.com and register there to keep up to date on all the future videos that are coming. So thanks a lot for joining us. I'll see you next time.